I really would like to. I'm really curious how many of you have kids, but you know what? I'm not going to worry about that because even if you don't have children, there's some child out there that you're going to be a parent to at some point in your life. I understand this, and this is my perspective on it because I had one child, and I wanted to have more children. I really did. I wanted to have more kids, and I never got a chance to, just because sometimes life doesn't give you exactly what you want. And what happened was, all through my life, though, I would run into all these kids who kind of needed a dad. And I was like, well, I might not be your dad all the time, but I might be your dad for the next 20 minutes. Or when I'm on social media talking to young people, I realize sometimes they might need a father figure, and I enjoy that. I like that. And that really takes me back to the village concept that ultimately, when you talk about something, it really taking a village to raise a child, I think revisiting that village is going to be one of our keys to prosperity and success. So whether you have a child or not, I want you to really take this information. It's a very basic model. I'm going to break it down for you. And I want you to make sure that there are children that come into your sphere that hear the information that you share with them about how to be successful, that you position them to win the economic game. So let's get started here. All right. So here's the bad news. First of all, a lot of experts say that we're 228 years behind whites when it comes to wealth. I don't believe we're behind anybody. I believe that we should be more focused not so much on how far behind we are relative to white people, but how far are we behind relative to where we can be? How far are we behind where we should be as a people? One of the interesting things about the black wealth issue, or what they call the wealth gap, is that there are some experts who might argue that is there really how real is this gap, in the sense that which benchmark is appropriate? Who do we compare ourselves to? Like, for example, there are countries on this earth, 90% of the countries on this earth have less resources than the black community do. 90% of all countries, we could actually buy all of their gross domestic product. We could buy every good and service they produce for an entire year with the money that we spend on, hair, makeup, potato chips, houses, shoes, new cars, etc. And so here's the interesting thing, though. Over the last 30 years, the gap has actually grown. When people talk about that distance between white wealth and black wealth, a lot of people think that the gap is going to shrink just because time has passed, but that's not true. That's like running a race and you're 40 yards behind, and you think that because the race keeps going that you're eventually going to catch up with your opponent. You may never catch up. If your opponent's running faster than you, then you're going to keep falling behind. If you're sitting still or running backwards, then the gap is going to increase. It's not going to decrease. So black wealth hasn't increased very much. So the gap is actually growing in between whites and blacks. So yes, we're falling behind. If that's your measuring stick, if that's what you care about, then yes, we are falling behind. Now, and the interesting thing is that I've used the term illusion to talk about the black wealth gap because I don't like the fact that we focus so much on the gap, in the sense that it creates a kind of deficit thinking. A lot of times, if you think you don't have anything, then you don't tend to value what you have. If you're focused so much on what other people have, then it's very easy to forget what you actually have. When I was a little kid, I used to have cousins that got designer jeans and all the fancy new toys, and because I wanted what they had, I felt like my toys weren't worth anything. I felt like my clothes weren't worth anything. And my mother had to smack me upside the head and say, boy, don't you realize that there are kids out here who can't have any school clothes? And so ultimately, with the wealth conversation, we have to be very, very careful, because when you talk about the black community as destitute, as broke, as a community that simply has nothing, then what occurs is that people start to have a nothing and a poverty mentality. Why would you invest what you have if it's not worth anything? But actually, if you have a handful of seeds, that handful of seeds can become a tree full of fruit. But you got to be willing to plant the seeds. But if someone tells you that your seeds aren't worth anything, or that you need to wait for somebody else to bring you a fruit tree, then you're going to end up throwing your seeds away so you can sit there and wait for the tree to arrive.